Hey y'all, this is the blonde broker here at Genzio Media House. We are live for Consensus 2024, and I am joined by none other than the president of Filecoin Foundation. How are you today, Marta?
I am great. Thank you so much for having me.
Yeah, we're excited. Is this your first Consensus?
This is definitely not my first consensus. I've been going for many, many years.
How long have you been in crypto?
So I initially got involved in crypto back in 2015. I was a lawyer in the space. I was a sort of civil liberties lawyer and was really interested in kind of the privacy preserving aspect of the technology. And so I initially got involved in crypto just as a lawyer. Thought there were a lot of really interesting legal issues, and that was how I got involved.
That's really different because I think a lot of people would say, okay, that's hard. That's a really big struggle and something that I don't want to touch. And you just kind of dove headfirst into, I think, one of the hardest industries in the space, which is super cool.
Thank you for saying that. I really thought that the technology was very cool from the perspective of privacy, from the perspective of resistance to surveillance. And as someone who deeply cares about civil liberties, it was really appealing to me. And I just thought it was a very interesting technology. And, at the time, there really were not that many lawyers in this space in 2015. So a lot of interesting questions to ask and talk about back then.
I can still only maybe think of like 5 off the top of my head in the space now. But no, that's amazing. When did you get started with Filecoin Foundation? Where was like the inspiration? I want to hear all about that journey.
Yeah, so I was very, very fortunate to initially I was a lawyer in the space and represented a bunch of different clients early on. And one of the clients that I represented were some of the early folks who were building the Filecoin network back in several years ago, and I guess 2018. And I was very lucky to get to work with them. I thought the technology was amazing, and I was really delighted to sort of get more and more and more involved, initially as a lawyer, and then to be involved also in building Filecoin Foundation.
So what is Filecoin for maybe someone that has maybe heard of you guys, but doesn't quite know? I would be super interested to hear.
Yeah, so I like to analogize Filecoin to Airbnb for file storage. So the idea is that people can kind of rent out their computer hardware to other people, and others can store files on their hardware. The reason that matters is, we sort of all live our lives through just like a handful of corporations. So like right now, if you go on a website on today's internet, what will happen is the actual data that you see is being stored by one of 3 companies: Amazon, Microsoft, or Google, right? And those are actually the companies that are storing the physical data somewhere in the world. And what that really means is, you have these centralized single points of failure. So we often will see this, like AWS will go down and suddenly like people's like smart toasters stop working, right? It's like sort of wild how when you realize how much there are these single points of failures. And for us, we really see this as the foundation of a better version of the web, where instead of having just a few companies that are storing data, what you can do is have a decentralized sort of version of that, where many different people are contributing their computer hardware, and other people are able to store files on their computer hardware. And you can kind of use the programmability of cryptocurrency to make sure that those files are stored reliably over time, right? So in the same way that you could write a computer program with cryptocurrency that says something like, for every second of a song, automatically transfer 1/1 millionth of a cent to the songwriter, right? And that can happen instantly and automatically. You can do that same thing with file storage, where you can say, hey, is my file still being stored there? It is? Okay, great. Then automatically transfer a small amount of Filecoin, right? Or you can say, have folks put up collateral, and if they in fact are not storing the file, they can be financially penalized for that. So it really allows you to create this incentive structure that enables this decentralized version of the web to kind of exist at the very fundamental infrastructure layer.
It's really needed. I've actually seen you guys grow a ton recently on X. So that's been phenomenal to see. Do you guys have like a total count, or I guess for scale or for size, for somebody to understand like how many people are actually utilizing the technology and how many people are storing their files?
Yeah, so there are thousands of participants in the Filecoin network. It's an open source technology, and we have all sorts of different stakeholders. So we have storage providers, right? And storage providers can be anywhere from, really individuals to, companies, right? People who want to provide storage on the network, start companies and, have servers that are available. So there's thousands and thousands of storage providers out there. You also have thousands of developers who are contributing to the open source project and actually helping to develop the technology. Then you have users, right? And all sorts of we have really interesting and amazing users, like everyone from the USC Shoah Foundation storing genocide survivor testimony on the Filecoin network, to folks storing climate data, to CERN storing scientific data. So all sorts of really amazing folks and organizations who are storing data on the Filecoin network as well.
That was my next question for you, which is perfect. Speaking of like organizations and other companies, do you guys have any partnerships that we can talk about?
Oh, sure. So one of the partnerships that I've been most excited about over the last few years, a little over 3 years ago, we actually partnered with Lockheed Martin Space, and we partnered with them to actually use IPFS, which is the storage network that underlies Filecoin, to actually deploy it in space. And so we worked on that for 3 years. And just earlier this year, we announced that we had actually successfully done a demonstration mission. So we had built an implementation of IPFS for satellites, and actually had been able to put that into space earlier this year. So that was my personal, I would say, favorite partnership from the last few years that we've been working on.
That's massive. That's so exciting. What was that feeling like when how long were you guys in development for that? And I guess maybe preparing, and I know you probably had like a huge team dedicated to this project.
Yeah, so actually, it's interesting. From the beginning, when IPFS was initially developed, it was called the Interplanetary File System, IPFS, because it was always envisioned as something that actually could enable better long-distance networking in space. So the reason for that is, if you have sort of a centralized network, like the way that today's internet works, when you go to look for a particular piece of information, right, you go to a website or you click on something, that data is actually getting retrieved from a particular server in a particular place, right? So somewhere in the world, that data is getting retrieved from a particular place. And when you're on Earth, it doesn't really matter that there's, you can get information back and forth so quickly, you don't really notice a delay. But when you're in space, there's a huge delay, right? Multi-seconds if you're talking about the moon, or multi-minutes if you're talking about like Mars, right? And so with today's centralized internet, if you want to get data and that data is on Earth, every single time you're going back and forth, and there's this huge delay in getting the data, right? With IPFS, instead of doing it in that centralized way, the way that IPFS works is it actually retrieves data not by a particular location, but based on what it is. So every particular piece of content has what's called a content ID. And instead of going and looking for data in a particular place, you just look for a content ID, and you can actually get that content from wherever's closest. So that means if you've already downloaded it, let's say you just clicked on it yesterday, then that it'll retrieve it from your own device. Or if you have a passing satellite that has it, you can get it from there. Or if there's a nearby lunar station that has it, you can get it from there, right? So you don't have to go back and forth from Earth with every click. And so it actually does make networking in space much better. And for that reason, it was really always envisioned as something that could enable networking in space. And we were really excited to be able to actually build an implementation of IPFS with Lockheed Martin Space, and to actually deploy it in space.
That is the coolest thing I've ever heard. I actually didn't even know what IPFS stood for until you said it too. So that, I feel like that is so awesome and probably good for us to know. Did you spend time at Lockheed? Like, did you get to go meet everybody? And that's in Arlington, Texas. Yeah, in Fort Worth.
Yes. So we actually were able to go to Lockheed Martin's space location in Denver, near Denver. Yeah. So we were able to actually go and see the satellite, and it was incredibly cool.
This feels like top secret, classified information that we can't talk about. But I think that is so cool. What do you guys plan to continue to build out with that? Like, you're going to have a team dedicated to the space project? Are you guys going to continue to build here? Like, where are you guys based, actually? I never got to ask that.
We are a remote, Filecoin Foundation is a remote team. And then, of course, Filecoin itself is a global technology with people all over the world, right? So very much your classic sort of open source technology with all sorts of people globally working on it. And we were really just the, facilitators of the governance process of the network, right? Really focused on that. One of the things that's really exciting is sort of now that we've actually demonstrated this, right? Now that we've actually successfully demonstrated this and built an implementation, it's really a technology that's available to be used for networking in space. So the hope is that technologies that are actually that space projects in the future, when they're looking at doing networking, will actually use IPFS. And we did open source this implementation of IPFS for space. And so that is the hope. And there are all sorts of reasons, even beyond what we were just talking about. There are all sorts of good reasons to use IPFS. Another is it's really hard to store data in space because it gets corrupted because of the radiation. And so there's a really high sort of failure rate. And that's another reason where if you need to go look for data in a particular place every single time, there's a pretty high chance that it's going to be corrupted if you're storing that data in space. So we would also love to see data being stored in space, not just on Earth, using IPFS. And then when people go and retrieve data using IPFS, they're just looking for wherever it is. You can store 10 copies of it. If 5 of them are corrupted, if you're using IPFS, it doesn't matter because you're just looking for the content ID and pulling it from wherever is closest.
I want to ask what is next for Filecoin Foundation. I feel like that is so crazy to ask because you guys have already accomplished so much. But what do you have planned for the roadmap over the next 5 years?
Yeah, there's so much going on with the technology. It's really amazing to see all of the different use cases, right? Yeah. So we were talking about space, but there's also some really amazing uses of Filecoin in the human rights context. Okay. So things like war crimes evidence, evidence of war crimes in Ukraine that's stored on the Filecoin network and preserved, that's been submitted to the International Criminal Court. Wow. Super cool and interesting projects that are using Filecoin to make sure that human rights data is preserved and not destroyed. Also, a lot of really interesting sort of scientific, various different scientific data sets, including CERN as one example. I'm also really excited about the idea of certain projects that are already building on the network that are looking at doing decentralized compute. This is really important in like the AI context, similar to what, if you think about it, it's sort of in a simple way. If you think about what Filecoin did for storage, you can do the same thing with compute to kind of oversimplify, right? The idea that instead of having just a few companies that can afford, right, the computing power to run AI models, you can actually create a decentralized version of that, and that will enable you to make sure that the power of AI doesn't just end up in the hands of a few players the same way that you've seen that happen with big tech.
Leveling the playing field. Yeah, I feel like storage cloud compute has just the last, I don't know, maybe 6 months has just blown up all over X. Definitely a lot of space is happening about it. That's so exciting.
I feel very lucky to get to work on a technology that is about so much more than finance, right? Like this isn't a financial project. This is a project that is really about building the future of the internet, really a project that is about human rights, civil liberties, so much more.
It's life-changing. It's meaningful. It's impactful. You guys are changing the world. You're an industry leader. It's been awesome interviewing you.
Well, thank you so much. It's been so great to talk.
Where can we find you? Are you guys going to be present at any other conferences this year?
So we have a ton of events going on all around the world. We actually have a program called the Orbit Program where there are tons of community members all around the world who host events. So there's some events around the world that are hosted by Filecoin Foundation, but many are hosted by just community members. We are going to have there will be Filecoin community presence at Token 2049
in Singapore.
And yes, there will also be presence at ETHCC in Brussels and also in Bangkok at DevConnect later this year.
Cool. Well, we'll be excited. We'll definitely be there at those conferences as well. So I'd love to be able to interview you again. Maybe we could do a podcast session. So what is maybe like, is there a website that people could look up to see the events that you guys are going to be at?
Yes, they can see what events we'll be at phil.org/events.
And then where can they find you guys on X or on the internet?
So people can follow us on X, formerly known as Twitter, at Phil Foundation and at FFD Web.
Perfect. Awesome. I definitely follow you guys. So if you guys are listening, make sure you find those ats. Make sure you big shout outs to Marta and all you guys are doing at Filecoin Foundation. I thought that was an awesome interview and we'd love to have you guys back.
Thank you so much.
Definitely enjoy Consensus 2024.
Thank you. Thank you so much for having me.
Nice to meet you.